Minister K. Shanmugam today announced the maximum penalties for 3 types of sex crimes are set to rise. A 48-year-old woman has died from her injuries after a fire broke out at her flat in Ang Mo Kio. And a nightclub on Orchard Road is ordered to close after breaking safe distancing rules for a second time. You're watching The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Quay. Subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. The maximum penalties for 3 sexual offences are set to be increased. Law and Home Affairs Minister K. Shanmugam told Parliament today that the proposed changes come after a review following public uproar over several cases in recent years which raised questions over whether the sentences imposed were adequate.
Outrage or modesty is not merely an offence that a man commits because he is tempted by the way a lady dresses. Voyeurism is not merely a thoughtless act that a young student commits in a moment of folly. These and other similar offences, whether committed against a female or male victim, should be dealt with seriously. These actions must be seen as an affront to our fundamental values. There can in general be no excuses for these offences. Mitigation pleas based on the offender's educational qualifications or academic potential should not carry much weight. For such offences, principles of proportionate punishment and deterrence should generally take precedence over rehabilitation. This means if you touch a woman inappropriately without her consent, if you upload intimate images of an ex-girlfriend or any other woman, if you video record a woman showering, you must face serious consequences in law. And you shouldn't be able to come to court and say, you have a bright future, you will go far, and so on. You can go far, but first serve the sentence.
Those convicted of outrage of modesty will now face a jail term of up to 3 years compared to 2 years previously. Offenders could also be fined and/or caned. The maximum sentence for 2 offences involving sexual communication with minors is also set to be raised. The first offence is for sexual activity in the presence of a minor or showing a sexual image to a minor between 14 and 16 years old. The second is for similar offences relating to minors between the ages of 16 and 18. And these offenders will serve a maximum jail term of 2 years, up from 1 year previously. Mr. Shanmugam also said the Attorney General's chambers will generally reject rehabilitative sentences like probation and community-based sentences for adult sexual offenders. There are exceptions, though, like if an offender has an intellectual disability. Some examples of such offences include voyeurism, outrage of modesty, and voluntarily causing hurt against a vulnerable victim. And you can read more on this at straitstimes.com or in tomorrow's paper. Well, medical subsidies will be revamped by mid-2022 to ensure that those who need financial help with their medical bills get a larger share of these government subsidies. Acute hospitals will base subsidies using per capita household income instead of an individual's income. The Health Ministry will also introduce one subsidy range from 2 for the B2 and C class wards that will range from 50 to 80%. The change will mean higher subsidies for lower income patients who opt for B2 class and lower subsidies for higher income patients in C class. And to make it easier for lower income patients to opt for private A or B1 class wards, the ministry will allow them to get subsidized follow-up treatment at specialist outpatient clinics. A national pharmacy will be set up to consolidate medication delivery across public healthcare institutions from 2022. The first phase will benefit all polyclinic patients taking chronic disease medications, followed by patients from public hospitals.
When ready, the National Central Field Pharmacy will consolidate medications across multiple providers in a central location, enabling delivery of medications directly to patients' homes, secure post boxes, or other convenient locations. This will improve the access to pharmacy services, including for seniors with mobility needs, as Dr. Tan Woo Ming mentioned, and support new care models such as telemedicine.
And over 56,000 public healthcare workers will get salary increases over the next 2 years, starting in July. Senior Minister of State for Health, Koh Poh Koon, said nurses will see pay bumps of 5 to 14% in their monthly base salaries, while other healthcare staff like pharmacists and admin staff will get increases of 3 to 7%. However, doctors and dentists will not be included, as their salaries were last updated in 2019.
COVID-19 has been a trying time for all our healthcare staff and volunteers. I know many staff in our public healthcare institutions suspended their annual leave to meet the surge in manpower demands during the height of the COVID-19 crisis. Many have played a critical role in the battle against COVID-19. Now I would like to express our heartfelt thanks to all of them for their dedication and their contributions, and their families for supporting them through this very tough period. Our healthcare workforce is the lifeblood of our healthcare system, and the work they do is critical in protecting the health and safety of our society. We must maintain the salary competitiveness of healthcare staff against the overall market to attract and retain quality talent.
Well, moving on to transport, where Minister Ong Ye Kung said Singapore's aviation sector will see some recovery this year as some countries reopen their borders, but it's not realistic to expect a V-shaped rebound.
So our mission this year is not so much to force this sharp recovery of the aviation sector, but to adapt to a new normal, to reopen safely, to build up confidence, to test workable concepts, and to strengthen the belief that Changi Airport will still be an international air hub post-COVID-19. And we are seeing signs of that happening. When WHO scientists from around the world were planning their study visit to Wuhan, they decided to gather in Singapore before they make their way, and they flew through Changi. The World Economic Forum has decided to hold its meeting in Singapore in August.
Well, Mr. Ong told the House as well that the government will look to revive the aviation industry by replacing quarantine and stay-home notice requirements. 4 ways to do this. First, COVID-19 testing, which Singapore can now perform more than 60,000 tests a day. The second way is to keep travellers away from the community. Third, opening up to countries that have the virus under control, like Australia, Brunei and China. Mr. Ong also said Singapore has not given up on the idea of the air travel bubble, which allows for all forms of travel. The last way is the implications of vaccinations. When Singapore can determine the extent to which vaccinations can reduce COVID-19 transmission, it could enable vaccinated travellers to arrive with fewer restrictions. Other things brought up during the debate on the Transport Ministry's budget: e-scooter and power-assisted bicycle users must pass a compulsory online theory test to ride in public. This from the middle of 2021. From September, all bicycles must also be equipped with at least one functioning handbrake. Over $655 million in relief payouts have been given to taxi and private hire drivers as of February. The government has earmarked another $116 million to be paid out under the COVID-19 Driver Relief Fund between March and June. And Singapore's maritime sector can expect $20 billion worth of investments from industry players by 2024. Foreign Affairs Minister Vivian Balakrishnan said the keys to reconciliation and the solution to Myanmar's political and humanitarian problems lie within the country itself and in the hands of its people. In response to parliamentary questions on how ASEAN plans to address the turmoil in Myanmar, Dr. Balakrishnan said, quote, "There's a limit to how far external pressures will be brought to bear."
And I want to emphasize that my key objective, again, perhaps influenced by my medical background, is first, do no harm. Do not raise false hopes, do not incite, and do not encourage further crystallization of disputes and violence. So I say all this so that Singaporeans, both within this house and outside this house, will understand that despite all our fervent and earnest hopes of reconciliation, the keys ultimately lie within Myanmar. And there's a limit to how far external pressure will be brought to bear. It doesn't mean we approve of what they have done and how they do it, and we are clear in our expressions of disapproval. But let us also be realistic and let us hope that good sense prevails.
Our Indochina Bureau Chief Tan Hui-yi joins me now. So, Hui-yi, off the back of what our Foreign Affairs Minister said on Myanmar, the country is facing heavy external pressure. For example, on Tuesday, ASEAN urged the Myanmar military to stop the violence, and yesterday, the US blocked the Ministries of Defense and Home Affairs and top military conglomerates as well from certain types of trade. How is the junta, though, reacting to these external forces?
From past experience, we know that the military regime is pretty impervious to Western pressure. If anything, the regime has become steadily more brutal and violent in its crackdown. Many protesters who died in recent days were shot in the head. And on Wednesday, we saw medical workers in Yangon forced to get out of the ambulance and kneel on the ground and basically bludgeoned on the head with rifle butts and other objects. It's unclear at this point what effect the US sanctions will have because Myanmar's biggest trading partners are not in the West, but actually in Asia. They are countries like China, Thailand, Japan. Its top investor, as you know, is Singapore. And, ASEAN at this point can only apply diplomatic pressure, but not much else. The military regime has tried to paint the anti-coup protesters as rioters and anarchists. In a state-owned newspaper today, there was a report claiming that violent protesters were holding things like smoke grenades.
The UN Human Rights Chief yesterday cited the death toll of at least 54 people since the February 1st coup, with over 1,700 people arbitrarily arrested and detained. Despite the crackdown getting more violent, are you seeing more citizens joining the protesters? And the ones that are already in the protests, are they growing more fearful?
So the violent crackdown has done two things. It has reduced the size of the crowds, for sure. In the initial days after the coup, we saw families take children and grandparents out to join these protests, but now no longer. Yet the crackdown has made young people more determined to stay on the streets. What we are seeing in Yangon now are pockets of young people holding their own protests. Often they create these temporary barricades in their own townships to slow police down. And when police move in on them, they run away, only to re-emerge in the streets. The protests, I must maintain, are still largely peaceful, but the demonstrators have been carrying more protective gear because it's obviously very dangerous out there now. And they are also using creative means to slow down police, like sticking pictures of commanding Chief Minang Line on the road because the soldiers don't want to step on a picture of their leader.
Right. Well, the detainment of Aung San Suu Kyi, a big reason why people are protesting in the first place. And another female figure has become a symbol among young protesters, 19-year-old Ma Tie-sin, who was shot in the head by security forces when she was protesting. So, Hui-yi, how have these two women influenced those, especially women, on the front lines of this movement?
There's been a lot of attention on these young, outspoken, especially female protesters who grew up during a period of rapid liberalization when political expression was flourishing. In a sense, they symbolize the kind of future that Myanmar people might have had if the generals had not tried to turn back the clock with this coup. Aung San Suu Kyi, meanwhile, is a symbol of resistance against the military to many people. In any case, what's clear about the anti-coup movement now is that the regime's violence is hardening attitudes quite rapidly. Just this week, I was speaking with a woman who insisted that I refer to the military as a terrorist group. The sense of grief and outrage at the violence seems to be drawing Myanmar society further and further away from the point where reconciliation is possible.
And Hui-yi, what can we expect, or what should we brace for over the weekend?
I'm afraid there's just going to be a lot more violence and intimidation and mass arrests, and the death toll will rise. At the same time, we should look a bit further and keep an eye on where the economy is heading. The strike by both civil servants and private employees has crippled the banking system and basically brought much of the economy to a standstill. Cash is difficult to get hold of, so people are holding on to it. That will make the regime more vulnerable over time.
Well, Hui-yi, as always, we appreciate your time with us. I've been speaking with Tan Hui-yi, Indochina Bureau Chief at the Straits Times. In other news, a 48-year-old woman has died from injuries sustained when a fire broke out in an Ang Mo Kio flat this morning. She and a 20-year-old man believed to be her son were unconscious when they were taken to Tan Tock Seng Hospital. Firefighters found her unconscious in a bedroom and performed CPR on her as she wasn't breathing and had no pulse. The man was trapped in the kitchen toilet. The Singapore Civil Defence Force said firefighters had to force their way into the unit. The fire had engulfed the living room due to the vast accumulation of combustible items. The cause of the fire is under investigation. All 5 workers injured in the Tuas explosion are out of critical condition and have been moved into high dependency wards. Meanwhile, Senior District Judge Ong Hien Sun has been appointed to lead the inquiry committee into the incident that killed 3 foreign workers. He'll be assisted by Petrochemical Corporation of Singapore's General Manager and A-Star's Chief Innovation Officer. They will ascertain the causes and circumstances that led to the explosion and make recommendations to prevent such accidents in the future.
This shows our commitment over the long haul, because this was just one of the incidents that we had in February. So there were 11 in total fatalities. That it's very extremely alarming for many of us and deeply concerned of how we started this year. We understand that we are working under different conditions in this COVID-19 pandemic, but it does not necessarily give anyone the excuse to compromise the safety of our workers. Each life lost is a loss of our breadwinner and loss of our life. We must take this very seriously.
An update on the COVID-19 situation here. 9 new cases were reported today, bringing Singapore's total to over 60,000. All 9 were imported and had been placed on stay-home notice upon arrival. More details will be released later tonight. Visits to some sites during the upcoming Tsing Ming Festival will be limited to 2 people per household. This year's festival falls on April the 4th, with the National Environment Agency expecting crowds to peak on Good Friday 2 days prior, as well as on the weekends between March 20th and April 18th. Those driving to Monday Columbarium on these days will have to book an appointment. Club Peaches, a nightclub in Concord Shopping Mall, as well as Tasty Lung in Tiong Bahru Road, were ordered to close for not following safe management measures. The operator of a noodle house in Boat Quay has also been fined $14,000 for failing to ensure safe distancing measures and allowing the consumption of alcohol after 10:30 p.m. Meanwhile, 31 people were fined $300 each for not observing safe distancing rules at parks and beaches on February the 28th. And a man originally accused of a murder at Orchard Towers in 2019 has been sentenced on a reduced charge. Tan Hong Sheng received 4 years and 9 months jail with 12 strokes of the cane for being in the company of someone possessing a weapon. Well, for more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below. I'm Olivia Quay and I'll be back with Haryanto Deman on Monday on The Big Story. Enjoy your weekend.